Great.
For those of you just joining us, we have Rachel Cole, who's the head of the Northwestern University Transportation Library, and she's here today to do a presentation on a part of their extensive airline menu collection. Rachel, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Are you seeing my presenter slides, or are you
Yes.
seeing, you see the notes? Okay, just a second while I switch. Is that better?
Oh, no, it was before you had it.
It was better before.
Better
okay,
before.
let
Yep.
me see if I can switch back. Oh dear, oh, there it is. Okay, is that better?
Here you go.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited to be here to talk about our menu collections here at Northwestern University's Transportation Library. I'm Rachel Cole. I am the curator and head of the library, a role that I've been in since 2022, when my predecessor, Roberto Sarmiento, retired. Prior to that, I was the library's public services and reference librarian starting in 2015. So I've had a long role with the library, getting to know collections, donors, students, and faculty. And I think there's some really exciting things that I'm excited to share with you. A couple of notes about the library. We are open to the public. So I will share our website later so you can check to see public visiting hours. For special collections and archives or research support, you'll just need to make an appointment, but I'll touch on that soon. Shown on the menu here is a 1971 menu from our David Toms collection from Alitalia. It is reproducing a lithograph from 1803 called La Minerve, which was a satirical lithograph satirizing the balloon craze of the turn of the 19th century. So just one great example of art throughout this collection. A little bit more about the Transportation Library and our collections. We were founded in 1958 as the Transportation Center's library. The center actually was founded 4 years earlier, and they wrote into their founding documents space and funding for a library for collections and staff. And so we have long ties going back to the Transportation Center here at Northwestern. They really have worked over the years in current transportation innovations. So today that's things like automated, connected, electric, and shared mobility. In the 1950s, it might have been things like the interstate highway system, or in following decades, personal rapid transit, SSTs, the innovations over the decades. So we've built collections to support that research over the decades. So we are collecting, looking towards the future of transportation and how that will shape our cities and travel patterns, as well as this great collection building from our origins in the mid-century. So it's a great, really unique collection that represents the shaping of cities and transportation networks in the 20th century, as well as going forward. So that portion represents probably about 98% of what we collect. Maybe 2% are special collections and archives, which include things like the menu collection, as well as timetables, various passenger ephemera, photographs, and so on. Our main patron base is the Transportation Center students and faculty, but we also reach students from across the Northwestern community. I was excited the other day to get a small donation from a student from the music program here. So just an illustration of how we really do reach across programs here at Northwestern. And then a global community of researchers. Patrons from around the world are welcome to email us with questions, and we are happy to provide research support, generally in a small capacity for outside researchers, but at least get back to you to let you know how we might be able to support your research here at our library. And since our collection does number over 500,000 items, we are one of the largest transportation research collections in existence. And then again, we're open to the public. Our website is on the screen, or you could always Google Transportation Library at Northwestern and find us that way too. Just a few quick examples of the sorts of things that make up our general collections. Again, we're collecting on current innovations in transportation and also their impacts, environmental impacts, economic impacts, equity impacts. So these are some of the recent journals and books that we have in the library, as well as a number of databases that we subscribe to, transportation-specific databases. And if I were to say that there's a way that our students' needs are changing in this era, it is related to the need for data. And so databases providing things like airline schedules and on-time information and that sort of thing are really important to our students' research. So our collection is about 54% entirely unique. So 54% of the materials in our circulating collection don't exist elsewhere. They can't be found in WorldCat. And one of the reasons that our collection is so unique is this gray literature that we collect. It is materials, reports, and research that is not published through conventional publishing channels, and not generally collected or maintained by libraries. So it's things like planning studies, annual reports, conference proceedings. And you can see on the screen here some of the great art from the mid-century too. So I think that mid-century design in our collection is not limited to our special collections, but I think really spans across the transportation libraries, circulating and general collections as well. These are also the sorts of materials that I'll point out can be accessed in the library. They're on the open shelf, or if you are not local to the Evanston area, they're available through interlibrary loan through your local institution as well. And then to touch on one area of design that I think is not necessarily obvious to everyone, annual reports are this really rich source of graphic design. Our collection has a rich collection of annual reports dating back to the 1830s. International in scope, but primarily focused in US railroads and airlines. And this Continental Airlines, the Saul Bass design is just one of my favorites in aviation history. And I'd only ever seen the red oval with a jet stream traveling through it, but until I'd seen this annual report, had not seen the full effect of the jet traveling through the logo. In this era, annual reports were one of the primary sources of airlines and railroads launching new brand designs. So it's exciting to see here. And then another favorite is the Braniff International design, headed by pioneering advertising executive Mary Wells Lawrence, who brought on sort of a dream team of designers, including Alexander Gerard, who is responsible for some 18,000 pieces for the airline, including the typeface shown here, plane liveries, seat textiles, and then Emilio Pucci, the fashion designer, who was responsible for crew, flight attendant, pilot uniforms, shown on the screen here. So again, an annual report is a source for design that one might not expect. And two more from Ethiopian Airlines and Air Malawi. We have a great collection as well of annual reports from independent African airlines from the mid-20th century. This was a subject of an exhibit that we did back in 2019, I believe, a digital exhibit that you can find online. It was called Independence in the Air, and it was primarily informed by annual reports and timetables in our collection. So we began collecting menus, beginning with the Foster collection in 1997. George M. Foster was an alumnus of Northwestern. He studied his undergraduate career was here at Northwestern, and he met his wife, Mary or Mickey Lacron Foster, in an anthropology class taught by Melville Herskovits, yes, who the Herskovits Library of African Studies here at Northwestern is named after. They're across the hall from us on the 5th floor. We each have our own tower here and University Library and do a lot of work back and forth. So the Fosters became world-renowned anthropologists, George and Mickey, and traveled the world in their work as anthropologists, as well as work in NGOs, including WHO and UNICEF. And in their travels, they collected menus along the way. So they donated a collection of about 400 menus to us in 1997, and that became the basis of the menu collection that we have today. We've expanded on it over the years and completed a digitization project in 2007. So that initial donation and some that followed are available online through our digital collections portal, which is on the screen shown here, dc.library.northwestern.edu. Other collections that I'll be talking about today, the Lillian Malmstrom collection. This is a really unique collection for our library. Airline enthusiasts and rail fans tend to be a largely male-dominated, I wouldn't say industry, but group of people. So we have two collections donated by women. Lillian is one of them. She's an alumnus of the Northwestern University Business School. She graduated in 1958 and was married to a United Airlines employee for many decades. So on their travels, they would collect menus. In 2017, she donated 74 menus to our library. And I made that a priority for processing last year, and the finding aid was completed in 2023. This will be a future digitization project. One of the interesting things about it is to see some of the materials that show up in this collection that I haven't seen elsewhere from donors, including things like a baby bottle cooler and a disposable diaper. So materials used to take care of small children that may not have been distributed to men in flight, but Lillian and other women collected them. So you can find the finding aid online to see what's in the collection, and then expect, I hope, for this to be digitized in the future as well. And then finally, the Robert M. Baer collection. This was a significant expansion of our menu collections. Baer had an extensive career in the travel industry, beginning in 1978, working as a travel agent for airlines as well, teaching travel classes, even a tour guide in South America, and again, collected menus throughout the years. He had a really great eye for design. So it's a definite focus of this collection. You can see he was looking at the design of the menus as a key element. And so in 2021, he donated 504 airline menus to our collection. The finding aid was completed the following year, and it's in digitization at the moment. So you can expect that the existing transportation library menu collection that's online will be expanded by about double, and those will be able to be accessed, we're expecting, by October of this year. And we'll make various announcements on our social media and to our newsletter, so you can see when that happens. Other special collections that we have include the William R. Huff collection, shown on the left here with the Empire Builder timetable, the David L. Phillips collection, which is a collection of CTA ephemera primarily, but materials from airlines and railroads as well. And then the Ira Silverman menu collection, railroad menus, and the Michael I. Ashworth collection. And one of the fun things that we have here is the Skyline Coffee Shop menu, second from right, is a 1964 menu, 64 menu, excuse me, from Canadian Pacific that had been in our collection for many years. Michael Ashworth is a relatively new donor to our library from the UK, has this really fascinating career working with London Transport and with museums in the UK. And then his latest donation arrived with this fantastic partner to the earlier Skyline Coffee Shop menu from 1967. We're also continue to receive donated collections of timetables and other materials, including from donors like David Stringer, which we have a fantastic and beautifully compiled and organized collection that we're looking forward to continuing to receive as well. So this is actually the earliest depiction of food or drink in our collection. It's not a menu, but it's the earliest depiction. It's a new acquisition from fall of last year. It was acquired. It's a broadside from 1784, celebrating the first successful balloon flight in England. So a broadside is just a document that would have been printed on one side, distributed publicly, could have been handed out or posted publicly for people to see. But they're celebrating the successful flight of Vincent Lunardi. He was a minor Italian nobleman and the secretary to the Neapolitan ambassador to England, and also a pioneering aeronaut. So the illustration, I think, is really charming. It shows him in the basket. He's holding a wing, and the idea was that wings or oars would have been used to steer the balloon. The text here too talks about how this is a machine for travel. And we tie our special collections policy, or I do, I try to tie our special collections development policy back to what's happening at the Transportation Center. So looking at innovations in transportation, and this would have been the innovative transportation technology of the 1780s. So also in the basket with him is a lapdog, a cat. The cat got sick en route, and so he touched down briefly to let the cat out and travel along the way, and a bottle of wine, which is that earliest drink in flight in our collection. This is the earliest menu in our collection. It's from the Robert M. Baer collection. It's a 1938 menu for Sky Diner service. This is still the early days of food in flight, starting in the 1920s and 30s, and food in early 30s, I should say. Food would have looked maybe more like a picnic, with cold food with sandwiches and chicken, with coffee and tea service and thermoses. And in this era, we're introducing heated food in flight. And so it's kind of the chef era happening with the airlines and celebrating the chefs of the day. So in this case, it's Chef Max Burkhardt, whose name is listed on the menu, in this very charming illustration of the chef sampling his food with a plane sort of circling in the background. Continuing with the chef era from the 1950s, this is celebrating 3 of United's chefs, and it's a postcard. So it was really intended to celebrate food as really like a selling mechanism, or a mechanism to bring in new travelers to airlines, and promotional mechanism. So the postcard says, "Fine food prepared by experienced continental chefs is a tradition aboard the Hollywood and other famous United mainliner flights." And you can see it's a postcard written by someone who signs his name Daddy to his son, Brian Bush. And he's asking Brian to make sure that the trellis is clear on the back of the postcard here. But you can see 3 of the celebrated United chefs on the front of the postcard as well. This is the president menu from the 1950s. Again, celebrating food in flight as a partnership with Maxims of Paris. Convection ovens that were invented during World War II were beginning to be employed in commercial aviation at this time too, just another one of those innovations of military aviation translating into civil aviation. And so food could be frozen on ground and then quickly reheated on flight to serve a plane full of people. These flights on Pan Am, again, it was a partnership with Maxims of Paris. The president flight would have flown from New York to London and Paris, and have been restricted to 43 passengers with 5 cabin attendants. So just really hands-on service and a luxury dining experience in air. This is an Air France menu from our menu collection. It was designed by Luc-Marie Bayle, who had this really fascinating life. He was a French naval officer and an artist, who served in the French Naval Academy beginning in 1932, and then went on to this fascinating career where he was a photographer and historian for polar expeditions in the 1950s. He actually commanded the French Navy in Polynesia in the 1950s, and then began working for the French Naval Museum in the 1970s, and somehow also had time to work as an illustrator for menus like this for Air France, as well as maps for the airline as well. Menus in the collection also can illustrate some of the oddities for in-flight service. This was Western Airlines' 1957 hunt breakfast service. So the idea is that it would mimic an English fox hunt. And so flight attendants would don these red coats with black caps and black lapels and push a dining cart through the cabin that would have a tape recorder installed in the dining cart, and it would blare these like bugles and fox and hound calls. And then a traditional English breakfast would be served with fruit and breakfast meats and eggs and whatnot. I think this is a slightly less charming service in flight. It's the United Airlines Executive Service, which was a men-only flight operated by United Airlines. Women and children were not allowed on these flights, and they operated between Chicago, New York, and LA daily at 5 p.m., aimed at businessmen. So we can see on the screen some of the things that they would have been offered in flight. So you could sit down, you get your slippers, you'd have your pipe to smoke, cocktails and steak dinner, this like very clubby atmosphere where you could gather around a card table, play cards, read the local, the latest business news and whatnot. So these flights were finally ended in 1970 after protests from the National Organization for Women and complaints to the Civil Aeronautics Board. But again, just an illustration of sort of the culture around airlines in this era. And again, it's an uncredited artist, which many of the menus in this collection or generally are. And this is a BOAC menu from the 1960s that I think is just a really nice illustration of the glamour of travel of the era. It shows people gathered on the terrace of a New York City apartment with a skyline in the background. It just really looks like the height of 1960s glamour to me. Again, it's another unnamed illustrator. One of the interesting things about this menu too is we can see the flight went from London to Bermuda, Nassau, and Miami. So the flying distance between each of those points before it reaches Miami, and what food would have been served in each of those segments. And back to Braniff, this is just one of my favorite pieces. This was from the Maelstrom collection, and so it's fairly new to me because it was recently processed. And I was just so delighted to open it and see Alexander Girard's dove of peace on the cover. The dove appears throughout his career in artwork and paintings, various forms, jewelry, and then to see the dove of peace holding a martini glass on this bar menu, I just think is so fun. Again, it's an Alexander Gerard piece in the Mary Wells Lawrence era from the 1960s, and it's a bar menu. So passengers could have selected, a cocktail, an alcohol and a mixer, and then indicated a seat number and have had it brought to them in their seat. This is an example of one of the international menus in the collection. It's Pan Agra, Pan American Grace Airways. And it's this great illustration of the national coats of arms of South American countries that were served by the airline. And so here we have sort of towards, well, if it's a clock, I would say, what is that? Maybe 5 o'clock, 5:30, Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, and then around showing the various places that the airline flew in South America. One of the charming things about menu collections can be some of the holiday menus that we see. So this is United Airlines 1963 St. Patrick's Day menu. It has these charming illustrations of a leprechaun, and on the right, he's holding a shamrock, which was a little piece of fiber art that could have been removed from the menu and worn on one's lapel. And so it's a menu, celebrating the holiday, but then also providing this extra souvenir for the passenger to take with as well. And then in the center, we can see this is a menu donated by George Foster, so we can see his notes. He will almost always indicate the city, the origin and destination of the flight, and the type of plane that was flown. So this was a DC-8 from Denver to San Francisco via Salt Lake City in 1963. Another charming menu from a few years later, it's United Airlines again. This is their Halloween menu. And excuse me, I have the wrong date listed on top. It's actually 1966, not 69. But it is this charming little witch, and she lifts off her hat to reveal the jack-o'-lantern underneath saying boo. And the third holiday menu, this is Pan Am's Thanksgiving menu for 1966. So if you wonder if you were flying on Thanksgiving Day 1966, what food in flight would have looked like, it was a very traditional Thanksgiving menu from Pan Am with roast tom turkey with chestnut dressing, cranberry sauce, candied yams, buttered peas, apple cider, and pastry, and a choice of drink as well. Menus didn't just always look like traditional menus. This is National Airlines 1968 Sun Reflector menu. So it would open, shown on the left is the closed menu, and then on the right, the menu would open and it could be used as a sun reflector for tanning once you reached your destination. This was a DC-8 flight to San Francisco, and it has a note to please accept this menu as a souvenir of the occasion. This is some work by David Klein, who many of us are familiar with for his poster work for TWA, but he did some menu work as well. Looks very different to me, particularly on the left, just much more traditional than the modernist designs that we're used to seeing from his posters. But on the left is illustrating Sequoia National Park in California. On the right is Chicago. I love the John Hancock building in the background there. I think it's just actually a really nice modernist depiction of that building. These are the posters that you'd be more familiar with. On the left is his poster for New York, which is actually not in our collection. You can see I borrowed the image. It's cited there from the Library of Congress. Just wanted to share that because it's something people are very familiar with. And on the right is something that I purchased last year for our poster collection. And now a reproduction is hanging in our reading room. We did a reproduction for preservation reasons. We don't want to expose this to light and to changing humidity and temperature fluctuations. So the original is in storage in our special collections room, and the reproduction is hanging. And this will be one of the posters that students will stop and take photographs in front of and have questions about. So just like a nice piece of generating conversations with students as well. One of the other very well-known illustrators in our collection is Bob Peak, who did some extensive work for TWA. He was one of the most prolific illustrators of his day, working on things like movie posters. He was known as the father of the modern movie poster, as well as fashion illustration, automobile design, advertising, and fine art. He started working with TWA starting in 1973 with an initial commission for 6 murals, and eventually did over 60 pieces for the airline, including about a dozen menus, most of which we hold in our collection. And they depict cities around the world. So shown here are Geneva and Madrid. So just kind of like a tiny encapsulation of the city and what it represents. as well as typefaces designed for each city, which I think is fun with Geneva and Madrid. This is his menu for Hong Kong, shown next to his picture for the original Star Trek, the motion picture poster, excuse me, the illustration for the Star Trek poster. And while it's not a direct, one-to-one, it does, you can sort of see the resemblance with this vertical rainbow coming down, the face is sort of behind it in the background. So the menu is from 74 and the poster was for a 1979 poster, but I feel like you can definitely see at least the influence happening there. He also did the poster for West Side Story, and this is a more direct influence. If you can see the stop sign, or the stop light, the one-way sign, safety zone, and detour sign sort of at the center of this New York City menu, you can see them recreated in the West Side Story poster at right with the, I should get my pointer. Let's see if this will work. Here we go. With the traffic light, the one-way sign, the detour sign is down here. So the poster is from 1961. And the menu is from about a decade later, but you can see this work repurposed in the menu design, which was fun for me to see. This was one of the menus that had been missing from our collection, and it was part of the Lillian Maelstrom collection, so just a delight to find this there, the Las Vegas menu. And then slightly different, the Pittsburgh menu. I just think this is so charming with the Steeler and the Pirates, and in the background, the steel mills of Pittsburgh. I have two more from this collection. I know it's a lot. So this is a TWA menu from 1974, again, Bob Peak, and this is a George Foster menu, and you can see he's written in very good next to this, this dish that he had. So he really enjoyed this Hawaiian ham steak, enhanced by fruit glaze, sweet potatoes, and buttered green beans. So the notes that he writes throughout this collection, I just find just really sweet. There are a couple of times he's like, service bad, and doesn't like something, but generally he's pretty happy with his food in flight, I think. And then this was a very recent donation. It came in March, excuse me. This was a donation from the collection of Phil Butler. And it was one of the missing menus, the menus that we hadn't had yet. So I think all we're missing now is the Washington, D.C. menu. So this was sort of like a combination menu with Lisbon, Malaga, Athens, and Rome. It is a delight to open the donation and discover this there. A few more international menus. It's the China Airlines menu from 1970. It is very reminiscent of Marimekko to me somehow with the chrysanthemums. I just think it's really lovely. It's nice to see again. It's a bilingual menu. We have drinks here and food service here. It's a Taipei to Tokyo flight. This is a transportation library menu collection item as well. And then another from China Airlines. This is a piece of cabbage. It's part of the National Palace Museum. So it's a photograph of that. It's a carving of cabbage, excuse me, made of jadeite. So it's one piece of jade, and it was carved according to the natural colors of the jade to represent the cabbage. So it naturally is occurring that it has the white bottom and the green top, and it was carved taking that into account. I have a couple of Pan Am menus from the 1970. This is one of the menus in the collection that has a note that it is that it was a recipient of a graphic design award from AIGA in 1970. It is International Flag Service, and it's designed by the New York graphic design firm of Chermayeff and Geismar. The idea was to represent all of the flags of the countries served by Pan Am in one image. So they've been abstracted and incorporated into this image for the flag service for 1971. And another from Chermayeff and Geismar representing the 747's introduction of Trans-Pacific service. So again, just a really nice, I think, typeface for the 747. And this was part of the branding campaign that Chermayeff and Geismar did for Pan Am, in which the name was officially changed from Pan American World Airways to shortened to Pan Am, with the graphic elements as well. A couple of menus here by the illustrator Don Daly, who is most famous as an illustrator of children's books. But I think this is a great one. It's TWA 747, sort of heading over this beautiful like smorgasbord of food in the clouds. And a second from the series, this is Cities of the World, representing various elements of skylines from cities around the world. So again, we see the Hancock Building, the St. Louis Arch, we see some San Francisco elements here. some English, the Big Ben and the Eiffel Tower and various world landmarks here as well. And then this would have been accompanied by in-flight napkins, which were beautifully preserved. This is part of the Bear collection too. To end on kind of a fun note, I have a couple of children's menus. This is from the Maelstrom collection again, and it's a children's menu for a very young child. It would have been a cereal, so oatmeal or rice cereal, together with pureed meats or veggies, a custard pudding, and teething biscuits for dessert. Just charming illustrations here too. And the Playfair menu from TWA from the 1970s, it's an unnamed illustrator, but this appears in several of the Bob Peak menus from the mid-70s as children's options too. And it has just, I think, a really fun and playful menu with hot dogs, corn chips, peanut butter and jelly or fluffer nut sandwiches, good humor on a stick. So just really, Hawaiian punch. So just a variety of fun foods for young people on flights. So what do we do with the materials and in our menu collections? This is our current exhibit that's up right now in our entryway. It's called A Visual Feast, Bob Peak's TWA menus. And it has, again, reproductions. We don't have space in the current moment to properly house materials with proper pH and temperature controls, light controls. So currently it's reproductions, hope to change that at some point. But this exhibit case is also relatively new to our library. Prior to 2022, there had been a big model of a ship in this space, and it seemed to me to be a better use of the space to showcase collections. And so we moved the ship. It went to, we call it dry dock in our offset storage, and inherited some display cases. And so we're able to do displays. This will be up through the end of summer. At which point we will replace it with an exhibit on the Power Broker and the projects of Robert Moses. Menus are also used in our exhibits. This was a 2020 menu celebrating the 50th anniversary of the 747. It was called the 747 Takes Off. And on the left is a menu from Japan Airlines 747, the Garden Jet, in which each section of the plane essentially had a different name corresponding to Japanese garden. So you have like the Garden of Wisteria, for example, or these other lovely names. Recommendation, I am a librarian, so I'd like to recommend, if anyone has more questions or wants to explore the food experience more, Food in the Air and Space by Richard Foss is a great resource. We have this in our collection, and I would guess that your local public or academic library has this, or your local bookstore has this as well. And then various ways to connect with us. Our website's on the screen here. You can email me. And then we have Instagram and Twitter presences as well. Instagram in particular, we look at as sort of a mini museum of transportation history, where we share items from special collections, write brief descriptions, sort of like museum labels is how I look at them, and share the collections and transportation history that way. So that's all that I have for you. Thank you so much for having me. We have time for questions, I think.
Rachel, thank you. I've recognized so many of these menus, so excited. And I love that you've got these new collections. My question is, how do you decide what is, well, I don't want to say good enough because that sounds terrible, but how do you decide what gets priority when when people are donating materials? How do you say, yes, this, no, that?
A really great question. I'm interested in acquiring materials, particularly that have stories that are not quite as well told in the transportation world, I think. But women, underrepresented groups, that sort of thing are a priority for collection development and building. So that's one priority, I guess. In terms of collecting menus, at this point, I think a lot of it does kind of tie back to the visual identity of airlines and the visual appeal of menus. I think there's a lot that can be learned about the in-flight experience of the actual food that's served on flight from things like secondary literature and archives of airlines. But I don't particularly see menus as the primary resource for researching food in flight itself. I think the visual element of that is kind of primary, and the elements listed on menus may be secondary. Something else I'm really interested in acquiring is really early menus. At this point, 1938 is the earliest. So anything from the early 30s or the 20s things like airships before the commercial aviation industry really took off. I'd be very interested in that as well. And we are planning an in-person exhibit here in the library in the future called The Art of the Menu as well. So it'll share a lot of these in person. And those are just, yeah, some elements that I would like to add, I think, to the exhibit.
Did anyone else have questions for Rachel? You can just take yourself off mute since there's so few of us. Go ahead.
Hi, Rachel. It's Marvin Goldman here.
Hi,
Well, I have
Marvin.
quite a lot of menus and a lot of menu postcards. And now I know a nice place at least to ask if they might want some of those.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Um, I wrote an article on airline menu postcards, which is posted on the World Airline Historical Society website under their Captain's Log section in the subcategory of postcards. And it includes some with, I think, pretty good visuals. And you might want to take a look at that.
I'm making a note right now to do that. Thank you.
And I did want to ask you, are you only looking for hard copies of material, or would you accept digital images in the meantime?
Just hard copies for our collection. We don't really have mechanisms for storing digital surrogates. So yeah, so and also I would say that just that tactile element for our students is so important. I was working with a student recently who had been looking at, this is not menu related, but it is related to, I guess, material culture, had been looking at a Seattle transit project and had seen this map from the 1980s online. And we had it in the collection. He was so excited to see it, the physical copy. He's like, can I touch it? I was like, yes, you can work with this. This is what it's here for. But so I think that physical element of the collections is something, particularly with undergraduates here at Northwestern, that's really important for them to be able to connect with.
Okay, fine. I'll keep that in mind.
Great. Thank you so much. And I have a note to myself to check out your article. So I will do that after the call. Thank you.
Hi, Rachel. Dave Stringer here. I just want to make a comment to all of you that are on the call that if you've never been to Northwestern's Transportation Library, if you're ever in Chicago, make the effort to get up there. It's just, it's fabulous. It's just, I try to do research there anytime I'm in Chicago, take a day or two to go up to Northwestern to research whatever I'm working on at the time. And Rachel, if I'm correct in saying this, I usually, if there's certain stuff in the collection that you want to look at, give them a day's notice, because sometimes they have to bring it in from off campus, from storage off campus. But last year or earlier this year, I told Scott Stacci, who was our kind of expert on Central American airlines of Central America, to go to Northwestern if he's in Chicago, and he happened to be in Chicago for a family reunion, and he went there thinking he was going to spend like maybe 4 or 5 hours at the transportation library, and he was just overwhelmed. I think he spent probably the entire day, until 6 p.m. just in the OAG collection. It's just it's a fascinating place to do research and to just visit. So.
That's
And
so nice.
I'm donating my timetable collection and my transportation ephemera is all going to wind up at the Transportation Library. So it's also a great institution, because the thing about Rachel and Northwestern is that they really appreciate this stuff. I mean, it's not like, like, oh yeah, we'll take your collection if we have room for it or something like that. It's like they really are into this. So it's a great institution.
Thank you so much for those kind words. Your collection is fabulous, and it's always a pleasure to see you when you're in Chicago. So thank you for all of that. And yes, you're all welcome to visit. Yeah, the transportation enthusiasm bit, really, I think a lot of it comes from our donors and their enthusiasm being so infectious. I didn't start out here necessarily as a transportation enthusiast. I did always have an appreciation for transportation, but the longer that I've been here, I think the more excited about things that I get. I think the more that I learn about them too, I think that's always something. So just like a really delightful group of people to get to work with, and the collections are really one of a kind. So thank you.
Were there any more questions?
Well, I'd like to thank you for just bringing your transportation library to our attention, because there's a lot of us who have material, Some of it's pretty old, some of it's valuable and unique, and it's a good place to know for possibly donating it.
Wonderful to hear. Thank you, Marvin.
Before we go, Rachel, I'd like to ask one question since nobody else has a
Yeah, of
question.
course.
Can you give us kind of a sneak peek of what's coming up for public display in the collection?
Yes. Let me think about that for just a minute. So we have an exhibit that I'm just starting now. It's something not related to this at all. It's on Great Lakes water transportation, passenger transportation on the Great Lakes. So it's a collection of ephemera related to passenger ships that one could have taken starting in the 19th century and into the mid 20th century, where you could take, for example, a 2-week cruise from Chicago to Mackinac Island to Buffalo and back, and experience many of the same onboard amenities that you could expect to find on an Atlantic cruise ship. You know, big bands and dancing and fine dining and whatnot. So it's a digital exhibit that's coming up. We also have an entryway exhibit coming up. It is the 50th year of the Power Broker, Robert Caro's book, The Power Broker, on Robert Moses. And earlier in the talk, I alluded to all of the sort of like planning studies and documents in the collection. So that'll be our entryway exhibit starting in August or September. We have to narrow that down exactly. So those are the two that are definitely on the books. The menu exhibit is planned for, so we have at Northwestern, we have University Library, which is where the transportation library is housed. It's this beautiful brutalist Walter Netsch building from the 70s. Then we also have Deering Library, building from the 1930s in sort of university Gothic style, and it is undergoing improvements at the moment. So our in-person exhibition space for larger exhibitions will be on hold for a couple of years. So once that returns, I'd like to have the menu exhibit up in that space once it's open again. So it won't be until at least 2026 when renovations are complete, though.
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing it, and I look forward to seeing the collection when I come in August. I'm
so excited.
even more excited now.
Oh,
So
that's so
Rachel,
nice.
again, thank you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Question for Rachel, or statement, whatever. Rachel, we should have an offline conversation about Pullman dining.
Oh,
when you get
fantastic.
the chance.
Okay. Absolutely. Let's set something up. Thanks, Bill.
Okay. Yeah, I'll send
Thank you,
you
Bill.
an email.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Benet and Rachel, for an absolutely fabulous presentation. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Same
Such a
here. Thank
pleasure.
you so
Thank
much.
you.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much again, Rachel. And
Let's
thank
do-
you all for attending.
Let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for having me.
I know.
Bye, everyone. Have
Bye.
a great day.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.